Ah, there we go. Thank you for reminding me.
You got it going.
And welcome, Josh. Let's see. Let me go ahead and share my desktop. Share screen. I'm going to do screen 2 here. Okay, so let's take a look at the GitHub Actions. So let's just go to, got these set up on a couple of the sites now. And slash, which one is it? Not that one. Fortunately, I was able to consolidate with the new action. It made it simple to consolidate the homepage here into a single repository. Before, kind of when you go through static sites on GitHub, there's two distinct types, and one is for your user account or for your org. There's the the typical format for your one primary homepage, your username or org.github.io. Kind of how the common method for doing that was to create two separate repositories. So that's how I originally had it set up. But with the new automation, it actually encouraged. I didn't really spell it out, but when I got into it, it kind of encouraged a better way of doing that, to where you can do it all on a single repository. So GitHub Actions. So Actions are here on the Actions tab. I think from what I've read, you can only see them when you're a member of the org, and so that's one of the things in the past with like PKS Ninja. When we were doing a lot of GitHub work, we did everything so that nobody had to be a member of the org, and still going forward, people will be able to see all the materials and the websites and stuff without org memberships. But one of the initial registration step, I think it's a good thing, to have it to where we'll have that ability just to request, when they do an initial user registration, have their user accounts added. I don't think it's really a downside, but one of the things I don't necessarily love about adding members to a GitHub org is that you can't add them per se. You have to invite them. And so, but that's not really a negative. When someone comes in to register, their the email account that's associated with their GitHub account will get an email from GitHub um, that will say, click here to accept the invitation, and they can click and accept, and it's an easy thing. But it isn't a straight adding people, which probably a good thing. You have to acknowledge that they want to be a member of the org. So so workflows. The GitHub Actions is a pretty standard new school type of new school format for creating pipelines. And let's just look at, so when you create so when you create a workflow, it spawns an Ubuntu VM for you, and then within that Ubuntu VM, you can go ahead and enter run commands for just about anything you want. Well, it starts on creating events, or which events you want to look for, and it can filter them by labels and things like that to trigger the workflow, and there's just lots of defined event types. So I should just open up. This is the API, isn't it? Let's see, actions, and where do we have events? Let's see, events. Come on. So that's probably the wrong document. Let me pull up the right document here. GitHub Actions. And this got good documentation. And I think, my experience with this so far is this is not in beta, and it is a mature, even though it's newer, it's pretty mature. It has good documentation, and even better than the documentation is just the experience I've had with it. Everything works kind of as it's intended to. And so let's see, where's the events here. Let's see. Event driven. I want to see, where's the list of events. Events that trigger workflows. And so when the first thing that a workflow starts with is when do you want it to do to trigger? You can do it on when somebody initially does a pull request. You can have it trigger, or you can have on the push action. Now it's important to note a push action is not only when you push something into a repo, because in many cases with production repo, nobody ever pushes anything into the repo at some point. Ideally, if in usually production type of environments, usually somebody does a pull request, and then people review it, and then they approve. One or more people is required to usually approve before it gets merged into your main repository. Now that event, when it gets approved, it gets merged into your primary repository, is always a push event. And so by triggering something on push, that just really means anyone can open a pull request. Once it goes through the review and gets, click accept, that is what triggers the push event. So like these two here are when anybody initially opens up some sort of request, and then, or when the request gets approved. And you can do scheduled events like cron jobs. So if you want to have a job that runs, daily or what have you. And they have manually, you use a trigger called workflow dispatch for manually initiated workflows. And we'll look at how that works in a minute. But this is an example of the syntax, right? So you can call the name whatever you want. You start with the event with this on keyword. And this section here is gathering inputs. And so when you have a very simple format for inputs, description required, it's all YAML, everything's YAML. And you can have a default value. And since the inputs are generally associated with manually triggered workflows, of course, you can have inputs in any type of workflow, but it's usually not the manually entered input format as this is. And usually the format will be a little bit differently. But this is nice because then when you manually trigger this workflow, it will pop up a nice form for you, and you can enter the value that you want in a form before. And then you have your job, and you have steps within your job. This is the name of the job, and you can have multiple jobs, and each job could have multiple steps. So that way when you go in and you look at it while it runs, you'll see it go through, visually go through jobs in sequence, or the different steps. And that's really just comes down to organization, because you could have one step and have any number of run commands underneath each step. And so you could have everything all running in one step, or you could have, if you have a long workflow, it's nice to when you go to visualize it and watch it run, you can see it process different steps and have some more organization of your workflow. And one of the really nice things I like about this is you see here, if you put like the pipe on, is a standard in YAML format to indicate, that the data for this field is on the following lines. And you can see they just have standard bash commands on each line that are properly indented, and it works great. And that's one of the tricky things sometimes about a lot of these type of formats for accepting commands. Some of them you have to go through esoteric or somewhat more esoteric format, and you can't just enter your command as you would on the bash command line. You've got to put it in some additional formatting steps. And it's really nice in here is they've got their interpreter or whatever reads these and digests these files to where you can just do put your commands just like you would on a command line, and it reads them nicely. I haven't had any problems with it yet. Let's see. And let's see, there's more event types, right? So you've got the web, you can integrate with the different webhooks that you can have set up on repos and orgs. And let's see, I know they have like pull request, or not pull, they have got issues on here as well. When people fork, issue comments, there's just so when issues are, we open issue, I mean, I think it's always a comment. And so if an issue is created or issue is deleted, or a new comment is appended to it. So you can see here on issues, all the different activity types that have event trigger, doing opened, edited, deleted, transferred. And so that's, I mean, it's cool. It's like anything, anytime anyone does anything to an issue ticket, you can filter down based on what it is that they want to do. If you want to have an automation that is triggered by whatever happens in the entire life cycle of an issue ticket, you can trigger based on that. And that's really nice because issue tickets are such that unless you have a private repository, nobody needs to have any type of permission to use to open an issue ticket. Now, to maybe do certain things to an issue ticket, you might need a permission level, but in general, it's nice because if you want to use this as kind of like a service catalog type of requests for something to happen, you could have an issue ticket. And I think it wouldn't make sense to have it such that any type of issue ticket that anybody opened would trigger the automation to run all the time, because you may only want to run differently based on different types of requests. And that's where the combining issues with the forms that you can have for issue tickets. Like, so if we go into the Ninja repo, right, and I go to issues and I say new issue, I've got 4 right here. These are just like the default and these are super easy to create, these templates for different types of issue tickets. And one thing people can't do if they're not a certain membership level is people cannot assign labels to their own issue tickets unless they get a particular permission level. But the administrator who creates these forms can pre-associate labels with the form. So something like, request to join ModernApps Ninja org, you can have people fill that in with simple form, and they don't even need to actually necessarily fill anything in. If you just want their GitHub user ID, that's automatically there just when they click submit, and you can have that append a label, and then you can combine these two things of being able to trigger on a new issue opened, combined with the filter based on label, and then you and this one here, this label is not for filtering. This is another way to run an event when somebody creates a new label or deletes a label. But you can use it as a filter as well. And so, yeah, new issue ticket of type X will trigger a workflow Z. But yeah, you can just kind of go see on the list here. There's just about anything you do on GitHub. You can like you can see here with pull requests, just about anything. You can filter down to all the different types of activity types with pull requests and so on and so forth to act as push, etc., to trigger actions. And so let's look at a couple at the actions that we have here, just to give, because these are real simple ones, real simple to get started. So if I go into my actions, actually before I go into my actions, because that's where we can see them running, I can, let's see. So on the workflows are in the .github folder of a repository. So for organization-wide settings, right, you can have a .github repository, right? But within each individual repository, like this one for ModernApps GitHub IO, you can have the same .github folder, and that can have forms for your issues or workflows. And as you can see here in this .github, I only have a workflows folder. So as we saw a minute ago, I've got issue tickets that were issue ticket types that were already popping up, and those aren't defined here. Now I could define additional ones here or overwrite the default ones, but I also have where's a .github folder here, which has a set of default issue template types, which are what we saw when we went to the issue tickets. And I can define organization-wide workflow types here as well. But on the individual repo level, if we go into workflows, the main workflow that I have running on this right now is this one called Hugo build. And what it does is name, Hugo, build and deploy, on, push to branches, main. So this is looking at the main, when a commit is pushed into or merged into the main repository, it's going to run a job. This one runs on Ubuntu 18. If I could have just said latest or whatever there. I just did that because this is based off of a reference from some actions that exist in the community for Hugo, which are actually really, really well done actions by this Peace Iris group. And they have predefined actions. So there's a lot of stuff in the community marketplace. And so whenever you go and are setting up workflows, one of the great things is as we kind of saw before, you can just put runs, and you can, like right here, this run, this is just exactly what I would enter on the command line. But in order to enter that, I need to first install Hugo. And that's not especially complicated thing to do, right? I mean, there's a set of instructions, and I could have several run commands here, just like I would do to install Hugo on any Ubuntu desktop or server that I would set up manually. So I could just have this like be a bash script. But it may depend on how, if you're looking for an action that exists in the marketplace, you can look at it and check out the quality and how much cool stuff it does. I was originally thinking it'd be nice to just have it set up like a bash script, so I see exactly, I have that exactly spelled out. But after looking into the predefined actions that were, created here by Peace Iris, is clear they had done a lot of really nice fancy work in creating this action that I wouldn't have normally done, that is really going to make the quality of this automation more robust and stable, and they're very well maintained. And so I decided to go mostly with community actions for this. Now the GitHub's own actions is just called actions, and so you can find those in github.com/actions, and these are, you see a lot of them in the documentation as well. And it's one of the biggest advantages of GitHub Actions is if you're using workflows for, and you have a lot of content on GitHub and you have a lot of things on GitHub, is it's definitely true that out of the box automations for common things that you do on GitHub are really well handled by these pre-built GitHub Actions that they have, and you can go through. And you can view these in the marketplace where they have very simple descriptions as well. One thing I didn't find in the marketplace though is in the marketplace for actions, you can filter marketplace to only show actions, but I wasn't able to see how to filter down the marketplace to only show actions from a particular vendor, a particular supplier of actions. It just seemed like you can search for actions, but it's going to show you actions from anybody who's created actions. And so going to the actual GitHub view of a particular action provider allows you to see, one, to filter down to that particular provider if you just want to be sure you're looking at the official GitHub ones, and you can also dig into the how the action works. Actions themselves that are pre-composed like this are in one of two formats. They're either and they of course include like bash commands as well, but when you publish an action, they're generally leverage Docker containers or TypeScript. And so, of course, within the context of Docker containers, anybody could, create actions with any development framework, but natively, it has most optimal support for TypeScript, and most of the actions I've dug into were written in TypeScript. But yeah, before I get into that more, I should just go through these simple examples, and then we can look at a few of the other things. So the way this works, right? So is on push every time. Since I'm an owner, I have these set up to where I can just push directly, even though that's not necessarily ideal practice. I think once we have everything more fully mature, I'll remove the ability for anybody to just easily push directly. And they'll have to open a pull request and then have it merged. But again, in either case, a merging of a pull request is still a push action. So whenever something is officially merged into the main branch, this will run. And the first thing it's going to do is it's going to do a proper checkout of the repository, whatever that means, but it works well. You can go through and we'll see when the action runs that they do a lot of fancy Git stuff that is beyond my level of knowledge in Git, but it is effective and can be meaningful to help make sure that you don't have conflicts and problems in various scenarios that aren't just the most typical normal scenarios. And one of the things here, which is nice, I got this directly from P. Cyrus, who already has these really nice actions for Hugo, is when you do the actions checkout, by default, it only will check out the GitHub reference that was modified in the pull request. Only the reference head, just that reference alone, not even the entire branch necessarily. And to properly build a Hugo repository, you need the entire repository. You need, if there are submodules in your within your repository, you need to have all those submodules pulled in locally, so that way when it runs the build, it has all the information it needs to properly build. And so we have it. You can define anything you want. This actions checkout has all different types of options as to exactly what you want it to include when it does the Git clone or what have you of the repository information into your Ubuntu container here or Ubuntu VM to run the workflow. And so these two commands just tell it, grab everything, including all the repositories. And then we have the setup Hugo action, which essentially just installs the latest version of Hugo into the Ubuntu VM. Once that's all set up and run, we've got just runs the Hugo command. And the Hugo command is just a standard Hugo command to build the HTML. And so just as a reminder, so the whole thing with static site generators is that for when someone wants to modify the content on the page, you may have even if you're an expert, you don't always want to be going in and writing a bunch of HTML by hand or what have you. You may have a tool that does HTML for you, in which case this may not be as useful, but especially in this case where you have different people coming that may be content experts that may contribute to the content on some of your pages. It's really nice that you can say, hey, here's a simple markdown text file you can go into without having to like filter through all the HTML tags and so on. You can just write your content or update a content in Markdown. But for it to be displayed in HTML, it means you need to go through a build process where something, in this case, Hugo, takes those Markdown files and converts them into HTML. And so let's just look at the site here just to show ModernApps Ninja. Turn that off. So if I wanted to edit the text here, right, these are just in all this text is all in Markdown format. I don't have the home page here set up to where anybody can just click to edit. I may do that. I figure the home page will be a little bit more static. We do have, this is probably a better example if we go to the vSphere with Tanzu course. For the individual courses, every page has this edit this page. And so let me click on a page that has text. So it's a little more straightforward. Oh, that one's got a video. Let's see which one has text. Let's go course introduction. Welcome to the course. And so this one has some text and some video. I can go and click on edit this page and we can see this course provides a technical introduction to vSphere with Tanzu, blah, 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 blah. And you can see right here, this is a little bit of a special format, but you don't even have to think very hard to realize, to figure out what this is. It's a simple format that allows you to not just, you could put a link to YouTube, but if you want it to render in a player a nice way, this format has a some JavaScript on the back end, and and it has these things called shortcodes that allow the developer of a template to expose how to get access to some nice JavaScript thing, like in this case, rendering the YouTube page really nicely, or the YouTube video nicely on the page the way you want to. And you can see you just put the name, the keyword YouTube, and then this is just the ID. So when you go to a YouTube page, it has the ID of the video right in the URL. You can just grab that URL and put that there. You can see I can go in here and make an edit to this page, and I can just say something like, we'll revert this out, but I can say, hi, everybody. Right, and so this page is here. This course provides a technical introduction to Vista with Tanzu. If you complete all the steps in this course, blah, blah, blah. And so I want to say, hi, everybody, but this is an HTML page. So something needs to happen, right, in order for this this simple edit in Markdown to become live on the HTML page. And so let's just watch that happen. So I'll put hi everybody there, and I'm going to just commit directly to the main branch. Normally this would happen. Someone would submit it via pull request. And then whenever I approved it or an administrator approved it, then this would trigger. But just in the sake of expediency, I'll just go ahead and push this directly to the main branch. And that way we can trigger seeing the action work. And so now if I jump into the action, you can see this little yellow dot indicates it's already running, and I can go ahead and go in here and I can see right under the actions tab, you can drill in and you can watch it work. It's setting up the job. And while it's actually running, it gets a little busy because these things open, the different steps open and close. Once this is finished, you can see it runs pretty quickly. It's really nice that you can really go through every single step that we had there, and you can expand and click. And so this one, now we notice we're doing this on the Vista Tanzu repo. I started looking at the homepage. This one is almost the same workflow, but this is the Doxy template actually requires a couple NPM modules to be installed. So if we look at this workflow, it's very similar. But there's a couple extra steps where this one says the setup node, and there's a nice setup node action provided by GitHub. There's also a recommendation to cache these dependencies. And this isn't something that you need to do, but the repo provider already had the template and the instructions already set up to where they said, hey, it's a tip. If you want to do it this way, it'll improve the performance of your workflow. So I just ran with their template and followed the advice there. And I just, I don't even know exactly what that does, but it works and it works nicely. And you can watch it, see, and then it does the NPM installation, runs Hugo, the command to build it, and then it deploys it, the GitHub page back out. And so now if we go back to the welcome to course, now that ran, I can refresh this and we can see, hi, everybody is there. And so it allows people again to go into these simple pages where they click on that link, edit this page. They see this, they can make those simple edits. And without the automation, right, every time anybody made an edit, somebody would have had to go in manually and delete the old HTML and then run the build commands to promote the HTML, push it back in. And ideally in these courses, one of the things we had a lot in the past, and I'm sure we'll see again, is there could, simple things like, we were putting out a lot of content. There might be just very minor grammatical things, left a period off the end of a sentence, and we'll have a hackathon and have a bunch of those requests come in. And we don't want to have every single time someone submits anything, whether it's simple or whether it's a more complex edition, to have to go manually run that. And so that is now taken care of. So I can just get rid of the hi everybody and go back to, what did I do? Maybe I need to refresh this. Since I did a back browser to that. So let's commit changes. The hi everybody's gone. So let's recommit that. And the workflow will run one more time. So now if we go back into actions, we see it's running again. But let's just let's look back and just take a look at the nice action script. So you can go in under your actions it'll show here a list of all the different actions that you have on this repository. I only have the one action right now. And so once an action is run, or if it failed, you can go back in and you can see. Now this is lists by jobs, and so if you want to have multiple jobs, it'll list them out by job. And then once you click into the job, it'll show the individual steps, and so we can see this job is set up a job, and it'll show exactly what it's doing here. And then it runs this action. And this is a great way, like if you want to get into seeing what an action does, it can be pretty esoteric to actually go into the repository and try and digest through the JavaScript. JavaScript's relatively simple, but these actions, especially an action that may have several different options or several different steps that it takes, and trying to look at the code and digest exactly how it runs, it can be really nice to just have a on your own personal repo, maybe set up a page, which I'll show you in a second, and you can even have it manually triggered, and you can just test these different actions through manually triggering them, and then after the fact, you can run in and go through and see exactly what it does. And so this checkout, you can see it does a whole bunch of stuff for you that you don't necessarily need to do all this stuff, but this is the best practices directly from the GitHub gurus of really making this a really robust workflow that'll work well as we scale. And set up Hugo, and you can just go through and see exactly what ran. And before I wrap, I know we're only got 15 minutes left here, and I want to leave a few minutes, but I do want to show you how to get started with these. So let's go to, which one did I do it on? I did it on afuel/. So I have I set up a Ninja Doxy template here on my own personal repo, which anyone, you can copy the templates that I've created, or you could do this with, say, anything you want. It doesn't even need to be a Hugo template, because your actions can be anything you do out of Ubuntu. They don't necessarily need to be related to Hugo. But if you wanted to test something related to Hugo, potentially it may make sense to use some Hugo template. And set up a page on your own personal repository. And so you can see, if I open up, this is just a kind of a clone of the vSphere with Tanzu site, but I set it up on my own personal repository, and I'm going to set it up so I can test actions here. And it's really nice to bootstrap on these. And so I copied that manually triggered workflow. And let's see, so if I go into, I want to actually, let's just look at the workflows themselves in the GitHub workflows. So if you may notice earlier when I was going through the documentation, we looked at a manually triggered workflow, or in this case, a walk flow. It was unintentional. I just copied that workflow directly out of that, and this whole thing is basically the exact thing. But then I've done some other ones here that you can just go in and modify the run commands if you want to see. That one's an automated one. Like you can see, I wanted to see some things like, what directory does it, if I want to initiate commands in the script, I want to see what directory I'm initially in. And then if I use this action from GitHub, after that runs, what directory, what does it do? And then afterwards, what directory does it leave me in, right? And so I could just come in and I keep testing different things. Like another one I was testing was the env command to see, I know that when I run a workflow on GitHub Actions, one of the nice things is it's going to do for me is it's going to pre-populate certain environmental variables with information about GitHub. Like if I trigger a GitHub workflow to run based on an issue ticket, it's going to have the information about the issue ticket there for me somewhere, right? And I can dig through the documentation for that. That's one way. I could also do something like this where I can manually trigger a workflow, and I want to see my env. And so let's just say, let's do that, right? So if I want to see env and let's go ahead and start commit. We'll call this update 1429. Yeah, that's good enough. Let's just do that. And that is a manually triggered workflow, so that shouldn't trigger any automation, although it'll probably trigger my other automation to run, which doesn't really hurt me. These are free, but I could put some filters on the other automation. But let's go ahead and let's look back at our actions. And we could see I have this GitHub Pages workflow here, since this is a Hugo template. And so every time I do any commit right now, it's going to run that. Even though this particular page isn't rendered into HTML, I could go ahead and go. It's probably better for me at this GitHub Pages that I go ahead and go in and edit that one. That one only will run, the Hugo build will only run when I edit one of the files that is in the subdirectories that get rendered in HTML. So I'll make that update at some point. But now I can go to this 1429 that I just modified, and I'll go ahead and I'll just click run the workflow. And you can see we have those inputs. I mentioned it's not the most robust form in the world, but it's still helpful to have a user input form if you want to gather these variables. In this case, I'm not even using these variables. I just left them there since they were in that default template that I run, but I can now manually run this workflow. And while that's running, I can go into this previous one where I wanted to do, remember I did print working directory, then run the GitHub action, and then print working directory again. And from that, I can see the very first thing I did is run pwd, right? And I can see here that my working directory is home runner, work, Ninja Doxy template, Ninja Doxy template. And if I go to run pwd after the checkout, it is also home runner work Ninja Doxy template. So that made me wonder, so what does the actions checkout do if it doesn't change my repository? Is this repository the actual repository? Is my working repository the one that has my GitHub checkout? And so I can actually dig into the actions checkout, and I can see that it essentially, I don't know, I didn't do an LS here, so I don't know exactly what this starts with. But this checkout action is something that you see recommended in pretty much all the different reference example workflows. And so regardless of what this may start with in your startup working repository, it's clearly a best practice from GitHub to run this actions checkout if you're going to be doing work on the repository based on the trigger. And so you can see this kind of takes the information that might have been in the default and just cleans it out and then resets it back up in the same one. And so the end result being that even though your working directory is exactly the same before and after the checkout, the after version, has your working directory will have a totally clean, appropriate clone essentially of the commit. And I said one of the benefits is, by default, this will, if you just run actions checkout by default, it will make sure that your working directory only has the let's say the pull request or the push, the reference head for the information that was just changed, which can actually, in many cases, can be really valuable to making sure your commits are very clean and easy to maintain. Now let's go and see what that env command produced. And so with that, the latest run of 1429 should be ready. Yep, that had run. So let's go ahead in here, and I can see it ran env. And now we can look and see some of the information that it has. So just by running it new, I was the GitHub actor, and it set up an environmental variable for me and some of this default information. And there's this, like as in commands typically have, there's a bunch of information here you could digest, but it's a great way to just go in and see for this particular, just by default in this particular trigger type, it has this information available already pre-populated for me as environmental variables. And it's just a nice little way to bootstrap by setting up a manually triggerable workflow. You can go in and change things and test things and play with things and then trigger it and then easily see the results. So So that was the GitHub Actions primer. I ended up taking up most of our time with that, but hopefully it was worth it. I think these are super useful. And like I said, on any public repository, let me stop sharing my desktop so I can get back to the video. On any public repository, they are totally free, unlimited, totally free. And you can create as many of them as you want and have them run as much as you want. And you don't get a long running server from that. But in terms of any type of workflow, it's like crazy what you get from that. And as you saw from some of those pre-composed actions, and it's very, very easy to find. I'm not, no need to reshare at this point, but in the GitHub marketplace, you can just filter for actions and search for actions. It's very easy to do. And there's about 6,400 different actions already in the repository, including lots and lots from the official sources. So there's lots of pre-built actions by Amazon for AWS, by Google for Google Web and Cloud stuff, by all the different cloud native type of application vendors, Red Hat, OpenShift, right? So they have actions to build and deploy OpenShift clusters and to log in, like one of the useful ones, like action to log into an OpenShift cluster, which is nice because you say, well, why would I need to log in? This is just a temporary running workflow. Well, if you want to, this is for automations. And so you want to enter some OC command or some kubectl command, right? But before you do that, you need to make sure that from the environment that's running the automation, it gets logged into the particular Kubernetes cluster that you want to run whatever your command is against it. And so having a login action there, and they have preset form that accepts the environmental variables for what's the URL for for the Kubernetes cluster. And these don't just run on public URLs. GitHub Action Runner is also a free open source server that GitHub provides that you can download and run GitHub Actions on your private environment as well. So you may think like, oh, well, my Kubernetes cluster URL may not be exposed to the public in most cases, right? No problem. You just download a GitHub Action Runner and you can create and run GitHub workflows against private environments as well, unlimited with those that GitHub Action Runner server. So I should pause there. That whole presentation was like a big run on sentence. Any questions, thoughts? Cool. So I guess I awed everybody into silence. Yeah, with 4 minutes left, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to get into futures. I'll probably hit some more of that next week. I'll be back next week, and then we'll probably take 2 weeks off after that, and then so next week, and then the first Friday is the first, so we're not going to be on the first, but so it's usually the second Friday in January, which is the first Friday after the holiday. And so, yeah, one more session before the break, and then we'll take 2 weeks off and then resume after the holiday break.
Sounds good, Art. Thanks so much for that deep dive.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to having a lot of fun with this one. It's just really been very elegant experience. Everything has worked as intended, as documented, which is nice.
That's great. And so I think you said the best way to start to fiddle with this is just pull in one of the Doxy templates into your own home directory, and then start.
And that's if you want to test the GitHub action against Hugo, then you pull in a Doxy template. But you don't need to have anything in your repo. You could have a repo with a README file and then create that GitHub workflows. Just if you want to go through and do things like test the print working directory in the env and test different commands.
Yeah, I was thinking about setting up a little mini framework to follow up on our conversation about putting in place a test, if you will, knowledge check sort of thing, right? Where somebody has to edit a YAML file and do a pull request and then have some, diff on that we do against it, maybe,
Yeah, absolutely. So you can
something.
go straight to Doxy. You can go to that vSphere with Tanzu 101 course, and you can copy that. You want to reference the documentation, because there's one command which is right in the Doxy documentation. I don't have the README on the vSphere with Tanzu set up to reflect the URL, but you can clone the vSphere with Tanzu or fork the vSphere with Tanzu repository, and then you just basically run Hugo server. But there are a couple, like 3 extra commands that you need to do, which are the same as you would for any Doxy template. So if you go to the Doxy documentation, getting started, and it says one of them is like git init recurse submodules, because there's submodules within the thing. And so you fork it or clone it, and then you do the git init recurse submodules. And then it requires that you install like 2 different NPM things. So you have to make sure you have Node set up on your, and I don't know much about Node, so you don't have to be an expert, right? But you just follow the getting started instructions in Doxy, and it'll say, okay, install Node, and then install these 2 things on your repository, and then you can do Hugo server, and it'll do a local build, and that'll work the same as against if you go to the Doxy instructions, it'll say clone the Doxy template. Well, you can do the same thing with the vSphere with Tanzu template and follow the same exact instructions, other than which URL you're cloning, and it'll work the same.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. Anybody else have any questions? Sorry, I was taking up a lot of the time there, Dan. Hey, John Gardner, good to see you.
Good to see you. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It was good, good stuff. I've done some GitHub Actions, but I think my Hugo Actions could be better. So
I'll tell you, if you go in and look at what like the Peace Iris has done, I was a little hesitant because I'm like, do I trust this Peace Iris person? Do I know if they're going to maintain them? But I think my feeling afterwards is they have some very, very sophisticated stuff happening in the way that they do that. That is very, very nice, and benefits that I don't necessarily need to have under every circumstance, but are nice. And I figure if they ever walk away from them at some point, hey, I could always go back to just making it a basic bash script, or I could, the code is open source, so I could keep the code and continue to choose to maintain it myself. I have a feeling there's tons of people who are using those. And so if for some reason Peace Iris ever disappears, I think someone will resume the mantle. But if not, I could always revert back to, but it seems like whoever Peace Iris does really good quality work there, and I don't think it's just gonna disappear that quickly. So I hope so.
well, like you said, it's open source, so
yep,
it's a starting
the
point.
code.
Nothing else.
The code is not going to disappear on us. Maybe someone, if she ever disappears, I assume she will be may need a new maintainer. But heck, it's a great, if nothing else, it'll be a great thing to be left with, because there's a lot of it's in TypeScript, so it's not like I still am learning. And one thing to look out for is in that actions, so github.com/actions org. They do have several templates there for developers. They are referenced in the documentation for actions, but I think some of the documentation, very good documentation. There are some as it gets to more advanced things, documentation is not especially thorough. But if you want to get into creating actions, start with the documentation. But then if you go to that GitHub Actions repository and go through, there's not tons and tons of actions. And so you just look through, you'll find they have several in there that are starter templates and things like that for creators of actions. So I have ones for people who are going to create actions with Docker templates, and for people who are going to create actions with TypeScript. Already set up, and really, really good guidance on getting started on either method that you're choosing to create an action.
Good deal. Thanks, Art.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, everyone. And I don't have to run right away. If there's anyone else has any other questions, I can hang out for a few.